But with that, I want to turn it over to a topic which, of course, for the past few years has been so important to all of humanity, and that is the changing patterns of immigration. And who better to lead it but Professor James Cooper. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Jamie, and I look forward to hearing this absolutely magnificent panel.
Thanks so much, Anand, and thank you. We're still waiting for a couple of our folks. If I could ask for your help, if we're able to shepherd the people that need to be here into the room. I know we're having some trouble, but Paula Schwartz is here. Hi, Paula, how are you?
Hi, I'm actually very excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. We're waiting on Professor David Fitzgerald from UCSD, Carmen Chavez from Casa Cornelia here in San Diego, and Masha Davis, who's going to be joining us from LA. But in the meantime, let me introduce you, Paula, and then we can at least start the conversation about some of the exciting projects that you've been doing to help solve the current migration problem in Greece. Paula Schwartz is the co-founder of startupboat.org. It was first formed with the help of more than 60 entrepreneurs from companies like Facebook, now Meta, Index Ventures, and others. And she's helped launch over 60 startups to help integrate migrants into the workplace and society across Europe. Paula's stepped out of her anachronistic family office, much like Prince Harry, and now lives with her partner and her 2 children between the US and Europe. Is it true your kids have four passports?
They do, actually, yeah, 4 nationalities, 4 passports. They actually have 5, including the Portuguese one, because we're also interested in crypto, and Portugal provides a golden visa for people who love crypto and support crypto. And so with migration, we also do a lot in crypto in Portugal. So
especially digital identities, once crypto gets or blockchain gets fully liberated from all the pump and dumpster fraudsters out there, maybe we can use it for things like food security and land titling and all the good things that the decentralized ledgers were meant to be used.
But I'm actually
welcome also to Masha Davis. Go ahead, please. Go ahead,
I was
Paula.
just going to say, I'm based in the US right now because I'm scaling what you just mentioned in Greece, since we had the Syrian refugee crisis coming to Europe. And now I'm seeing that a lot of migration topics in the US are not being discussed. People are coming from Venezuela, from Nicaragua, and there's a lot of social isolation. So we here want to also bring people onto the same boat, essentially, and listen to each other, create solutions together. And if we look at Fridays for Future and how many people they actually brought to the streets to demonstrate against things, we want to work towards things together. And this is why we do these design thinking sessions called Startup Boats.
Very good. Well, thank you for your good work. We were also joined by Masha Davis, and Masha is a nationally recognized registered dietitian and nutritionist. She's a humanitarian and founder of Nomastica. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Nomadista Nutrition.
Nomadista, thank you.
Yes,
nutrition.
I don't know what's happening with my filter again.
Wow.
Or with the video.
We're having trouble also bringing in our other 2 panels.
Okay.
But in the panelists, but you're based in Los Angeles, right?
Yes, I am in Los Angeles.
Well, I am so excited that you're here with us because you have lots of lived experience, as does Paula. Your writing and expertise has been featured in a number of publications and media outlets, and your book with publisher Simon & Schuster, Eat Your Vitamins, is available online and in bookstores everywhere. And before you launched your private practice, you spent 5 years in Africa managing programs for treatment and prevention of malnutrition in women and children, and spent most of 2015 in South Sudan. You've given a TED Talk X about your experiences a few years back, and you have your MPH from UCLA and your BS degree in nutritional sciences and dietetics from University of Wisconsin-Madison. We're very excited to have you. And as luck would have it, Carmen Chavez has come in exactly at the right time. Welcome, Carmen. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Carmen is the executive director at Casa Cornelia Law Center, a pro bono law firm in San Diego. I've known of her work and known Carmen for over 2 decades. Her center, Casa Cornelia, provides direct legal representation in humanitarian-based immigration applications, including asylum and related relief and protection, special immigrant juvenile status, U and T visas, VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Act, here in the U.S., the self-petitions and cancellation of removal for the last 23 years. She's done this work with Casa Cornelia in various capacities and has continued to lead the San Diego Immigration Bar. And we're just so excited and honored to have you here. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you and everyone.
Well, we're still waiting on David. Hopefully he'll be able to come in. He's trying to dial in from Davos, from Dubai. So in the interest of time, though, let's get started. Carmen, you're working directly at the U.S.-Mexico border, which is close to where I am. And I'm curious what you're seeing at the border and the kinds of clients you're seeing. And I'm curious where the people you've been representing lately are coming from and the kind of change in trends over the years, because there have been surges along the Tijuana, San Diego region, but the Remain in Mexico policy of the Trump administration and Title 42, it's creating a lot of problems out there. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes, well, that's a lot to unpack right there. I think it would be important to share that I have witnessed a lot of changes. My organization, Casa Cornelia, has been around for 30 years now. This is our 30th year. And so there's been definitely a shift in the composition and the profile of the persons arriving. I would say that in the last 20 plus years, those that were arriving were oftentimes what we saw were Mexican migrant workers, Central Americans who were fleeing the situation in Central America, largely from Guatemala and El Salvador. And then we've always had persons that have been had fled from various African countries. So that's what we kind of saw. In the mid-2000s, we saw a large group of Iraqis, nationals. They were fleeing the regime of Saddam Hussein. Largely, they were Chaldean and Kurdish groups that found themselves here. And then we used to have a significant amount of persons from Myanmar. Who knows, perhaps there's a resurgence there with things that are happening there. And then, of course, we had many persons that were either from Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Cameroon, Democratic Republic of Congo. So we're starting to see, again, persons from the Democratic DRC, Cameroon, and from Somalia. So that's one part. I mean, the profile of the asylum seeker at that time was largely male, single male who had traveled by themselves, who had been detained or had encountered immigration authorities and were in a defensive process in immigration court. And that's where they had to present their asylum case. More recently, we're seeing less asylum seekers from the Northern Triangle, although we still have many cases. And I know we'll talk about that more. They have less access to the asylum process precisely because of either the Remain in Mexico, also known as MPP, or the Title 42. So, and more recently, and I mean more recently, like in the last 6, 7, 8 months, we've been seeing a lot of Cubans, Russians, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Brazilians, Ukrainians, Haitians. On the affirmative side, we have also taken on dozens of Afghan cases who came fleeing Afghanistan, and they had a special parole, and now they have to apply for asylum. So that's kind of see. The profile has also changed, that now we're seeing more women that might have traveled by themselves or families. Many still remain detained, and in San Diego, we have a large detention facility that's contracted with the federal government. It's called Core Civic, and we attend to the persons that are there. But many more are non-detained, and that's in large part because of ICE's Alternatives to Detention program that's been going on in the last year and a half. As to children, as in the unaccompanied children, which we also represent, the profile historically had been older teen, male for the Northern Triangle, which is El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And now we're seeing a lot younger children, more girls, siblings traveling together, and definitely more of a diversity in the nationalities, including a lot of Afghan unaccompanied children. So that's kind of like the trends.
Globalized. Yeah,
very much.
It's it's for the old days of it being mostly Latin Americans, or this kind of misnomer that it's Mexican migrants has completely been turned on its head. Thank you for that work, and obviously we're talking about the changing nature of global immigration here at Digital Davos 23, and we're very, very grateful to have all our guests here: Masha Davis, Carmen Chavez, from whom you just heard, and Paula Schwartz. Unfortunately, Professor David Fitzgerald is having some trouble logging in from the United Arab Emirates, but we're going to continue along. Masha, can you tell us a little bit about your work over the years? And you've got a particularly important lived experience for all of us because you're Ukrainian, and as an immigrant from Ukraine, and then doing all this work in Africa, you've got a very different perspective. Can you talk about what you've been doing over the years and your participation in the world of assisting immigrants, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give, some more background. So my family came to the States as political refugees when I was 7 years old from Ukraine. And so I mostly grew up in the US, but most of my professional experience has been in Africa. I did spend 2 years in Geneva working with 8 organizations there. And then I spent 5 years in 5 different countries in Africa. I was in Gabon, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Chad, mainly focused on programs that were working on treatment and prevention of severe acute malnutrition in children and women. So it's been very, very interesting to see how these issues have changed and been impacted by climate change and migration due to this, in addition to conflict and economic pressures and many of those existing issues.
And what are you seeing in terms of NGO support and collaboration with international and non-governmental organizations as well as national governments?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there is something called the UN cluster system that's in place specifically for this. This was rolled out in 2011 exactly to address this question of collaboration and coordination on the ground when it comes to humanitarian response, especially when there's a large scale humanitarian response and there's a large number of players. So there's all the nonprofits, the intergovernmental agencies, the UN agencies, and the national governments. So there are 11 different clusters, each one focused on different thematic areas and specific areas of need. So for example, there's a health cluster, there's an emergency shelter cluster, a nutrition cluster. So when I was working in South Sudan in 2015 at the height of their civil war, we had the nutrition cluster activated, and I would attend the nutrition cluster meetings, and all of the different actors, the different players focused on the nutrition response were there. So we would have all the NGOs, the different UN agencies, the World Food Program, and then members from the local government. And this cluster system, I saw it in practice, and it was quite effective. And it was specifically developed to ensure that there wouldn't be duplication and that gaps were filled.
Yet there, with all immigration crises, you're seeing gaps that neither NGO, that governments tasked with providing public goods can't do, or even international agencies, the OIM, the Organization of International Migration, and others haven't, or even the EU's own authorities have been unable to match the 1 million plus Syrian refugees and other refugees who came over starting in 2012-13 with the Arab Spring, and then into the crisis in a big way in 2015 thereafter. Paula, you left the family office and started doing this work with a number of other entrepreneurs. Can you tell us how you tried to fill the gap, please? Can you unmute, please?
I'm sorry, I muted myself. So we use a very specific approach because we look at a market of 180 million migrants plus around the world. So we say migration is actually a very big market. And if as an investor you're smart and you're listening to the global developments that Masha just mentioned, with clusters emerging, new trends emerging, new technologies emerging, then we actually see migration as an opportunity rather than just a challenge. And we do see that from a national political point of view, sometimes refugees are not wanted or migrants are not wanted. It's just the same as when you have a market that is not open for a new player to come in, essentially because of cultural reasons or whatever. But at some point that market needs to open because workforces, for example, are needed, innovation is needed. And we speak for change. We speak for refugees, migrants who develop amazing things, like, for example, the Moderna vaccine, the BioNTech Moderna vaccine in Germany. That was a collaboration between a German and a Syrian researcher, and it went such a long way. And unfortunately, sometimes people like that don't actually meet. So people who see a problem are very motivated to work on something, and then they don't have the capital and the assets to actually continue their journey. And we have an online incubation program that you get access into after you've joined one of our design thinking sessions. So we invite people who are investors, we invite people who are refugees, and who can clearly state a problem statement that they would like to work on. We have designers, we have coders, we have strategists, and we meet offline around the world. So again, this was very much inspired by Fridays for Future and people going to the streets, but we wanted to have a methodology that people can work together with offline. And then there is a 6-day building process that is normally funded by a cornerstone investor who actually funds this group of 6 to 10 people who gets together in order to discuss solution statements. And then after that, as I mentioned, there's the incubation program, where for a VC, we make it quite easy to track the progress of each project because we actually have milestones that the individual entrepreneurs need to hit. They need to commit to the project. And then we monitor it month by month. And we've built something like an Uber for refugees, for example, because Uber can only allow you to access a vehicle if you have identification. You and I spoke about identification before. But a lot of people on the Greek islands, for example, they arrived by boat. They had no idea if they were in Greece or in Spain or in Italy or wherever. And people were not allowed to pick them up. And we're talking about 4 million people arriving on the Greek shores, right? So there's a market, and there's a product that's lacking, that's missing, that's not there. And you can show the scalability of this very easily if you have a process. And we are quite strict about our processes, offline and online, because we've seen shit hit the fan, sorry for my French, with the Syrian refugee crisis hitting Europe. That was very intense. And so, yeah, that's how I work together with my team. And specifically, my role is actually as a redhead who has a German-Greek background to speak up for these projects. So I'm in the middle of fundraising for our next cohorts right now. As I mentioned, we have a lot of cornerstone investors, and we want to expand our work to the United States because we see that people from Nicaragua are coming, Venezuela, so many countries, and the social isolation is so big. And I don't speak Spanish, so I need a team here that's very strong. And yeah, my role is to try and connect the worlds. And as a white girl, unfortunately, I feel like I have this unfair privilege where I can do that. And I want to use that for the best interest of myself and my kids. And they're all darker than me. And yeah, I just think we can push the world towards fairness a little bit more. If we try.
Here's for that charge towards equity. Thank you for your hard work. We're in Digital Davos 23. We're on a wonderful panel called The Changing Nature of Global Immigration. We're with Carmen Chavez from Casa Cornelia, Paula Schwartz from Startup Boat, and Masha Davis, I'd say a serial aid worker. And it's do-gooding becomes very much a vocation, and it's coming across with all our panelists. Carmen, the fact that groups like yours and others, like Casa Cornelia, like El Otro Lado, like ABA, American Bar Association projects at the U.S.-Mexico border. Everyone's there putting their oars in the water at the same time, hopefully. But coordination's still a problem. And, you know, if we see everything as just a state-based problem that we can throw government resources, assuming there are government resources, it doesn't always work. We need groups like yours, and we have to get, you know, like Paula said, we weren't ready for the surges. What can we do better to coordinate from your point of view? And I realize you're in it's a more rarefied world of individualized attention. You're not feeding people per se, although there's plenty of food in your office. What can we do better? And then we'll talk about some of the nutritional daily stuff that we need to with Masha, please.
Sure. I mean, there's so much to say. I feel very privileged that in the work that we do, we are connected. There is a network and other wonderful organizations, the ones you mentioned, and inclusively Jewish Family Services here in San Diego, along our corridor, which is a very busy corridor, as you know, between the San Diego-Tijuana region. Casa Cornelia has expanded, by the way, its services out into Imperial County, which is a 2-hour drive east of San Diego County.
And
so we are part of a
dry part of the world, and a lot of water is required. Yeah.
Yes, it's in the middle of the desert, literally. And it's in the middle of a legal services desert as well. So we're constantly networking, and we are part of meetings that we come together to talk. Each organization has a different focus, slightly different, but we definitely merge on a lot of different issues. And the current situation with asylum seekers along our border is no different. So Casa Cornelia, while it's more on the state side, some organizations that you mentioned, at least one of them, Al Otro Lado, has been focused in large part there in Tijuana to try to provide know your rights information, etc. So that is one. There are a lot of different policies in place, and I know we probably don't have time to talk about them, like Title 42, the Remain in Mexico policy, things that have affected. But I would say that the result of that has been to create a corridor of misery along our U.S.-Mexican border. You see it played out. It's, well, there's been surges in the past, not like this. And it really does take everyone. Now, the NGOs, the legal services providers, we're relatively individually small, and we have individually pretty much a limited budget. I know on our end at Casa Cornelia, the way we're able to expand our reach is by tapping into the private law firms who their attorneys give pro bono time, tapping into the community, talk about opportunities, tapping into the community of those that would like to further human rights and the asylum seekers' rights. We need language access. That is definitely one need that is very hard to meet sometimes with some of these languages. We're talking about over 48 different languages. So we tap into that. So how do we expand? How do we, by talking about the issue, by networking amongst ourselves, by trying to have meaningful conversations with government entities, and really the California Welcoming Task Force really tries to do a cross-border communication between pretty much the southwest of the United States and the northern part of Mexico. And of course, we're not just talking about Mexican nationals here, we're talking about people from all over the world. So that's one thing.
Can I just truncate here and ask Masha, what's a day look like, please, in a someone on the move, whether it's an internally displaced person in Africa? What's the nutritional or the caloric intake compared to someone who's like making their way over the desert here in the areas that Carmen's been describing, please?
Yeah. So, and like you said, it really depends on the country and the context, and whether someone is fleeing a conflict, let's say, or moving as a migrant from a rural to an urban area, which is a huge trend that we are seeing all over Africa. When I was working in South Sudan, those were the most dire conditions that I've ever witnessed. So people on the move there were fleeing this intense violence, coming from villages, walking for days, sometimes weeks, to the IDP camps. And I was working in one of the largest IDP camps in Africa, in this war-torn area of South Sudan called Bentu. And what I saw there, I'd never seen anything like it in any of the other contexts that I'd worked in, but some of the people had been walking for days or weeks, surviving on nothing but water lilies. So their caloric intake was just abysmal. And I saw the worst cases of malnutrition that I'd ever witnessed in that camp. And that's obviously a very, very extreme example. When people do arrive to camps, there are specific standards in place for their nutrition, for the rations, for the caloric intake. And the standards are 2,100 calories a day. That's the goal for the ration. And that's the number, that's pretty much the bare minimum for adults to avoid losing weight. And so that's the case in a lot of the camp contexts. And the issue that we're seeing now is that with this massive rise in food prices and with inflation, many organizations are struggling to even provide this bare minimum ration. And so the rations are being cut. The World Food Program, for example, like this is an absolutely insane statistic, but their monthly food procurement costs are now 44% higher than they were before the pandemic. So, looking at that, it's just staggering, the challenges that are being faced in providing even basic provisions.
And can I add something?
Please.
Yeah.
So
Please,
in Greece, we had the refugee camps being built into old prisons because it was not really welcome to have so many people there. So at one point we had 9,000 people in a 300 people prison that was remodeled into a refugee camp. And because for the Greek context, for example, the finances for the World Food Program, they were going over the Greek military. And suddenly we had a lot of insects in the food. So even though this food was being distributed to the people, in this tiny facility for way too many people, the theoretical caloric intake sometimes is not the caloric intake that people actually get. And then also men, as you know, sometimes steal the ratios of the women in order to stay strong and maybe have certain groups dominate the camp, right? So also the equal distribution of food is something that I find very, very difficult. Can
I those are such important issues. Forgive me for interrupting, Paula. I've just been asked to wrap things up. Let's do a quick lightning round. I want to thank all our panelists again for joining us here at Digital Davos. Our corporation, a very general question, yes or no, or a one sentence answer. Carmen mentioned earlier CoreCivic. There are a number of for-profit corporations that do the warehousing of undocumented people around the world, whether it's in Christmas Island off Australia or all around the US in terms of the private prisons. But there are also corporations that are doing really important work to help migrants as well. Let's go around our panel. Corporations, good or bad in the immigration space? Paula, what do you say?
Overall, corporate.
It's a very nuanced thing, but yeah.
I think we're in a very changing ecosystem. Even the meaning of a state is changing. So for me, that question would be too vague. Like I built startups, so I don't.
Yeah, exactly, and which turn into corporations if they're not already registered. So yeah, hence the question. It's a double-edged sword. How about you, Masha? What do you say? Corporations in the immigration space?
So, I mean, I see this from this humanitarian lens of the needs being at a historic high, and with the effects of climate change and the new conflicts that are happening, this is just going to keep increasing. So there's right now a very small number of traditional donors who account for the brunt of the financing of humanitarian assistance, and they are not able to keep up. So everything is going to have to shift. everyone is going to have to step in to fill these gaps. And that includes corporations, that includes the private sector, that includes private citizens. Like that includes just a massive lift that's going to have to be undertaken by everyone.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, a great answer. Carmen, you get the last word.
Well, I know you wanted a yes or no, and it looks like all of us have a kind of, it depends. I would say in the same vein, I mean, obviously, no one group can do it all. So here in the US, we have a lot of government action. Didn't get a chance to talk about what they're doing in the immigration court, trying to deal with the backlog, having these kind of quick expedited hearings, et cetera, which is supposed to expedite processes, but it's been shown that it's not always fair for the person who's going through it because they don't have enough time to get prepared. The private detention facilities have been problematic. They've been problematic. CoreCivic is one of them. I think there needs to always be a kind of a watchdog, if you will. Normally it's a government entity that contracts with them. That said, there's a lot of room for corporate support of organizations that do this kind of work, need help from everyone. So it's really a 360. You asked me what is needed. We need more resources.
Absolutely.
We need more resources. We need more judges, more asylum officers. We need to be able to fund public attorneys, such as those from Casa Cornelia and other organizations, because
we need more time. I wish we had more time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carmen Chavez, Executive Director from Casa Cornelia, Masha Davis, serial and renowned aid worker. Thank you so much for the wonderful work you've done in Africa. And Paula Schwartz, who has inspired us on how to take a family office and turn it into such a giving and wonderful organization, and to bring other organizations in with Startup Boat. Thank you so much, all three of you. We're Digital Davos. This was The Changing Nature of Global Immigration. I'm Professor James Cooper from California Western School of Law in San Diego, and I'll send it back to Anand Singh at our hub in Los Angeles. Thank you, everyone, for participating.